Welcome everyone to another great episode of Away from the Keyboards, the show that makes sure that all your NPM dependencies are outdated the moment you listen to the show. In today's show, we talk with Jouke. He's an architect and the founder of FrontenderZ, and he's here to teach us a little bit about front-end platforms and how to take the best advantage out of them. If you find any value in this conversation, remember to give us a like and subscribe to the show. So without any further babbling from my part, Jouke, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So we've worked before together, and one of the curiosities that I have since then is how did it all started for you? I know that you came from Rabobank back in the day, and you worked even with a previous colleague of mine. What was your origin story coming into IT?
I've been in IT for quite some years now. Going back, I graduated in '93, so that's more than 30 years ago now. We had MS-DOS, we had Windows 3.0. That was a whole different world, of course. So I spent my first 5 years in network administration, server management, that kind of stuff. Then basically 15 years in web development, mostly doing Perl. And of course, in those days, the backend generated the front end. So of course, everything was HTML. And we were fighting browser wars and all that, and making sure that stuff was compatible between Netscape and Internet Explorer and all that. But everything that you saw was still generated, of course, from the backend. And I always had an interest in user interfaces and in front-end development, but it always felt so needlessly complex. It started with the differences between the browsers, and later on, different competing ways of doing things, and a whole complex thing called jQuery coming up. And it felt like, yeah, that's nice for the fun parts. That's nice for making some interactive things. But you actually want to build an application, a front-end application, a client application. Yeah, that takes a whole different way of thinking about your code or organizing your code. And it was not mature enough. So I left that for most part of my career and focused on the back-end part of things. I took a sabbatical at some point and I tried to rethink what I wanted to do with my life, with my career. And I came out wanting to really focus on front-end development. And I felt that it had matured enough to at least put some effort in it and try to really understand it and from my experiences in how do you organize your backend development, try to take those learnings into front-end development. And I liked it. It was still quite immature. If you ask me at the time, I'm talking about 2013. So we were learning new ways of doing bidirectional updating using knockouts, JS, and those kinds of frameworks that were there in the beginning. And at some point, I landed on AngularJS, which sounded like a good way of having an organized way of doing your code, at least in the front end. And from there, through some different jobs, I landed at Rabobank as their front-end platform architect. And that's, for me, where it all clicked, where I could suddenly elevate the level of how do you do your engineering in the front end for a bigger group of people to help them make it easier to do their front-end development and not so much worry about the little scripting thingies and the CSS issues and whatever incompatibilities. No, that should be handled for you, and just focus on building those experiences. Taking that way of thinking and having the ability to do that at Rabobank. That really was for me the transformative, I would say, career move I made.
Well, and you also dabbled a bit into agility, I know from previous conversations of ours, right?
For me, that was part of the journey indeed. I got my first feet wet, I think, in agility in, let's say, 2010, I think, 29. First things sounding a bit like Scrum and all that coming up. But it didn't really vest itself in organizations where I was in back then. But at Rabobank, that was really a different way of looking at doing agility, and especially at scale. They had some learnings from SAFe, but it didn't really work for them. So at some point, they had a whole different way of organizing themselves, inspired by the Spotify model. Not an exact copy, because everybody knows you shouldn't. Let's not get in there. But at least the way of organizing the train of responsibilities were really low down in the organization, which is, I think, very good. But obviously, in a large organization, at some point, you will have conflicting priorities and whatever not. So when there is any alignment needed, you have a very straight upwards escalation tree, which sounds bad, escalation, but it's actually encouraged to let those things bubble up in the organization and to make those decisions faster. Teams can continue and are not blocked by those kinds of conflicting situations. And that's good to make it clear. And that's also driving the constant change of, okay, so we keep running into these things. We keep on running into that, improve and do it better. Also in the organization, but also, of course, within teams. So there's I think, a very healthy look there on how you should do agile development at scale. And I learned a lot from that, actually, yeah.
This episode of Away from the Keyboards is brought to you by you, the listener, and our Patreon supporters. Remember, if you get any value out of this show, like and subscribe. And if you want to support us even further, go to patreon.com/AFKS. That's patreon.com/AFKS. And now back to our scheduled programming. And you have both worked previously in your roles as an architect and also as a manager. Both are roles that lead organizations, one more on the people side, the other one kind of really on the technology side. So which one do you like best?
The architecture side, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm of course technically schooled. I took informatics in university and always been in technical roles. So that kind of feels comfortable to lead from that technological background and lead from a vision from that, rather than the experience of obviously have accumulated over the years in how to work with teams, influence teams, lead teams, and transfer that knowledge. It's suddenly that becomes the content you have to start leading from, as in from your people management experience. And I never felt that comfortable in that role.
Hopefully it wasn't me that caused that.
No, definitely not. It was kind of more like, it's more the imposter syndrome thing, as in, who am I to tell an experienced manager on how to lead their team? And obviously it isn't like that. It's not a role where you tell someone else how to do their job. But who am I to even, be used as a sounding board for the issues that you have with your team? Sure, I have experience in that, but did I do it right? I don't know. It felt somewhat uncomfortable having those conversations with experienced managers. I can help an inexperienced one. First steps, obviously, there are many pitfalls that everybody can help you with. But am I good enough to help an experienced manager? I was doubting myself a lot.
So I can attest that, at least from my experience, it worked really good. Though I was an inexperienced manager at the time, still doing my first steps into leadership and learning about it. So in that part, I can attest it worked great.
Happy to hear.
Cool. And before we go into our main subject, which is talking about platform engineering and front end, I do have a recurrent segment in the show that is called Pass It Forward, where a guest passes forward a question to another guest. And our question to you comes from Wolfram, the dolphin, and he asks, how do you explain to your top management that resources will have to wait for work?
I guess I would never go for having to do not so much work. You might not be on the main priority for some reason. There will always be work. There will always be something secondary to support the bigger goal, or to, I don't know, work on just overall maintainability or flexibility of your code base or whatever it may be. So I guess I would never sell it like that. I think I've always been very transparent in what I'm doing. I like transparency. If you can explain the situation, then that gives you buy-in most of the time. So I would never try to hide these kinds of situations, that's for sure. As in, we're blocked. We have to wait for that other team. So yeah, we've been doing other stuff, but we didn't tell anyone. No, make it clear. Make clear where the conflict is, why it is that it's better to do it this way, and always proactively do something about it. Set something in motion that resolves the problem. Take that action to not leave the team waiting and not doing anything without any guidance, and then have that conversation with upper management, as in, okay, this is the situation. We set this in motion. We already did this about this, and just for you to know, we handled it. I would want that responsibility to be as low in the organization as possible. You have an issue, you're an adult, you're a professional, you know how you should be solving this, try to solve it, and only if it becomes a problem, let us know.
Yeah, that's a great point. And a point that we discussed also in that podcast, which is you should always come with the solution first and then explain the problem, because we are all smart cookies. And that's kind of the reason why we got hired, is to solve problems.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. And moving into our main topic, talking about platform and platform engineering, how do you explain platform engineering to someone that never heard about it?
Actually, a couple of weeks ago, I was at PlatformCon and I saw a presentation from Gregor Hopp, and he came up with a very nice analogy. Actually, that goes back to Henry Ford organizing his factories in specialties. You do this, you do this, you do this. You're breaking down the work into parts that everybody's good at, and it goes faster. Now, that develops over time. These days, you just have the entire chassis basically as the building block, and you do different bodies on top of it, and you have a new car. That's the extreme form of platform engineering. Everything is out of the box. Everything is delivered for you, and you only have to put your own secret sauce on top of it, and it's a new product. Now, that goes a bit far, but at least imagine that if you are a factory worker and you're at least assembling that chassis, you don't need to know how that engine works. You don't have to know how all of the different parts actually do their thing. They just need to be so standardized that you can just pick them up, put them somewhere, and it just works. In the factory, it doesn't matter if you put engine A, B, or C in there. The rest all fits together because it's all standardized. It just fits in there, and there you go. And that's basically what platform engineering is. You provide building blocks that you can build your digital experiences with. And you, as the engineer building that experience, you don't need to know all the intricacies of everything. You don't need to know how the database is actually scaling for you. You just want a database. You want to store your stuff. So give me an API and I'll do my thing. If it runs into limitations in scaling, that's somebody else's problem because it's part of the products that platform engineering team has offered you. You have database as a service. You have logging as a service. And all of these things together, if you can build that as an actual internal product and treat it like a product, and you treat your developers as the customers, then you can build a really great developer experience. And that's basically what it's all about. Reducing cognitive load and providing a great developer experience for your own organization.
The reduction of cognitive load by creating reusable components, which is something that we learn in software engineering for many years, right? It's almost like using some tools out of the box or using some open source projects, but at the same time, bringing in the competencies to maintain that project within the company. And usually it's more seen, I think, in terms of backend projects where people have like the managed Kubernetes cluster that all the teams used, or some managed cloud service like a database. But there is a piece that is not that well known for many, which is the front end and how that connects to having a platform for the front end. Can you explain a little bit about that and the inspiration that came also for you starting your own company, FrontenderZ?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, many architects in general in organizations, but especially let's call them the platform architects. If you have a platform at all, then typically the platform architects, but also higher up in the chain, the enterprise architects. If you look at their background, that's usually in engineering, but hardly any of them has ever done any actual modern front-end development. They have no idea, no concept of how it actually works. How is the developer flow for a front-end engineer? So if you don't know how that works, then you don't know where the complexities are, where the friction is, where the cognitive overload, as we call that, actually resides. And what is the part that you can optimize and what is better left off to that engineer? That's a concept that is hard to grasp if you've never done any work in there. And it has evolved over the years. I think it is a craft in its own right. Backend development or front-end development, it is really, well, sure, it's all development, sure. And you do have full stack engineers. I'm not diminishing that full stack engineers that are there, but it is something totally different with its own ecosystem, its own peculiarities, things happening in a client environment, not measurable in your servers, in how actually that performs. there are all kinds of different things. I don't have to explain to you, but many people just have no good concept of how do you build that? How do you even test that in the first place? How do you test an entire front-end application? It's different. And because of all that, it has different requirements. It has different things that you can solve for them to reduce that cognitive load. And people are just overlooking it. They're kind of dismissing it as in, just build a front end for it and be done with it, or just vibe code it. That's definitely a possibility. I recently spoke to a startup founder who was not so much technical himself. He had a good understanding from a product management perspective, definitely not a coder. And he vibe coded his own front end for his own new product. But he was starting to see the cracks. He was starting to see, hey, but my co-founder also created something, but it looks different and it feels different. Yeah, exactly. So how do you make that as one whole? How do you make standard building blocks that even in a vibe coded environment, how can you instruct your AI to use the right components in the right way? Even for that situation, if you want to automate it away and really leave much more to the AI, it would be great if it had some standardized building blocks that do what you want in a secure way, in a compliant way for your organization. Then at least requires less knowledge, domain knowledge, or technological knowledge of certain tools to make it work.
Yeah, that's a great point because also accessibility is a great factor on that. From my experience with vibe coding, every time that it creates UI, sometimes puts buttons in a way that are impossible to click or that they are hidden, that a human cannot really interact with the application, but for the AI, it's not a problem because it can interact with anything in the application. So by having reusable components, you can also make sure that all the accessibility factors and that your own design system is also applied, even if you vibe code it.
Yeah, so seeing that there is really a lack of understanding of what can the whole idea about platform thinking, just take it as broad as that, how can it influence your front-end developers flow? How can it reduce, I don't know, time to market? How can it speed up your pipelines or secure your pipelines? Or not knowing that, not having any example, it's hard. It's hard to get started with that, doing the right thing. And I just had the opportunity at Rabobank to pioneer with that. I've been pioneering, that's the way I look back at it now, since 2017, having the opportunity to just influence a significant part of the bank in how they do their front-end development. Obviously, forming that vision by having many conversations with many of the developers that are involved in that step. But eventually, forming my own vision and trying to get everyone behind me. In the end, today they are running that platform, just a single monorepo with more than 160 teams, doing deployments more than 15 times a day. And everybody just is surprised at how well it works. And nobody cares about lifecycle management of all of the NPM dependencies, but except for the platform team. So that mind shift that eventually happened there and the ease at which they're now doing their development, yeah, it's great to see that actually happened. But it was all an experiment. It was all just learning on the job because there are no examples, there are no resources. There's a real lack of, thought leadership on this topic. And that kind of inspired me to start Frontenders, because I think if nobody's saying how it should be done, then I don't have all the answers, but at least I have a bunch of experience on this topic. So let me try to help other organizations in doing the same and reaping the same benefits.
And what is one misconception that you think people have around platform engineering and more specifically the front end platform engineering?
I think that many people are still considering platform engineering as just a different label on DevOps. And that's really not what it is. It is really, the way I see it, it is an evolution of DevOps, where in DevOps, we are supposed to run everything as well as build it, of course, which brought a host of new competences into the developer's skill book that they had to master. Platform engineering basically says, hey, there's so much you need to master. Let's make it easier for you. And that's really next level engineering. And the same goes for front-end development. There are so many tools to choose from. There are so many ways of doing the same thing, but what works and what doesn't work, what scales, what brings some level of uniformity throughout your entire code base? And how do you manage all of that? Those are questions that I think many organizations don't have a proper answer for. You see many groups of teams identifying that, well, they need to collaborate, but there's a lacking overall vision on, okay, so how do all of the teams work together? How do you manage to keep all of your digital experiences in sync visually and in terms of end user experience, and have no dead ends in your customer journey? Those kind of things can only be viewed if you take front-end development and front-end architecture, if you ask me, to the next level, talking on the level of an enterprise architect, thinking about capabilities of your platform that you elevate to create your digital experiences with.
Well, and that's a very important part of leading an organization and making sure that you have the right flow so that everything just goes and you don't have to worry about getting super competence on how do you need to build Kubernetes or how do you need to manage the NPM dependencies, because there's always a vulnerability or a package that is outdated. And this way there is a specific team that focuses.
Exactly.
But it requires also a lot of knowledge from the leadership to understand that this is a problem and they need to focus on that. And I think that's what you want to bring into the mix by creating Frontenders, right?
Yeah, exactly. There is awareness, I think, amongst a lot of front-end engineers. There is no real platform thinking in the minds of many front-end architects, I think. And there's a lack of understanding of what the front-end development flow is at the engineering leadership level. So I'm trying to just bring these two worlds together by educating both architects and leadership in, okay, what are you overlooking? Because they're really overlooking in the front end space, and also for the front end developers and front end architects to elevate their thinking into, okay, but you're not just building that nice feature for your customer. Think bigger, think for the entire organization. How would things be if you would have all of this out of the box and arranged for you? Imagine how much time you would save.
Indeed. And how do you think that, for example, your previous experience on managing people and managing managers helps you with this conversation with the technical leadership? Because in a sense, it's kind of leading them also into the right direction.
Yeah, I learned a thing or two about influencing just in general. If you have radical ideas like me back in 2017, when I said we needed a completely new way of working, a completely new front-end platform at Rabobank, and yes, we're gonna overhaul everything, and everything you've done so far you can eventually just throw in the trash because we're going left where you thought you were going right. People don't like surprises like that. You have to massage that message. You have to drop hints that things are going into a certain direction. If you close up yourself into your ivory tower as an architect, and then suddenly there's the outcome, and go ahead and build what I have mastered in my ivory tower, nobody will buy into that story. You have to keep talking to engineers. If you understand that they are missing a certain piece of information in order to better understand why you are doing things, then start educating them in a certain direction so that when the plan comes, it makes more sense. Same for management. If a big change is coming and a big project is coming up and they're talking about budget cuts, be part of that conversation. Make sure that you are heard, that there is a need for a certain direction that you want to be taken. And if they're cutting jobs at a certain point, then you cannot make this plan work. And why is this plan needed? Because we're trying to be more efficient in what we do. So yes, please hold on for a couple of years longer funding us so we can actually make the organization more efficient and save a lot more money. These kind of things, and that really requires more from you as an architect to really think differently about your role, not so much as a technologist, but also as an influencer of the organization. Because I think that's actually the role of architecture in general. And maybe many front-end architects thinking, hey, but I'm a React architect, I'm an Angular architect. Yes, that may be the current scope of what you're doing. But if you take it a bit broader, you actually want your front end not just to work for you, but actually that everybody sees the benefits of what you're doing with your team. bring it further and spread your ideas and get that buy-in and get an agreement with other architects on what you're doing and how to make it better for everyone and more efficient. Because that's eventually what managers will want to hear. You have to do more with less. So be more efficient. And if you are just saying, hey, but I need funding for my team, no, how are we going to elevate this way of working that is so efficient for all teams? Now, that's a different conversation.
And which one would you think it's the more difficult? Having this conversation with the software engineering teams and trying to convince them into going in this right route? Or is it getting management to sometimes understand that, yes, this will require more investment in the beginning, but you'll reap better fruits in the end?
I think it's ultimately up to CTOs to see and understand the benefits of platform engineering. If that's not understood at that level, then you're losing the battle anyway. So if you're thinking about, hey, we need a platform as an organization, we don't have a platform yet, who do I need to influence? That's really the most upper level in your organization. If they don't get it, it's doomed to fail. You can start little initiatives, but it will never be carried through. And there will be at some point resistance to using the platform that you have created. And then you need that buy-in from management to say, yeah, if 90% of the organization is using it, we can't have 10% not using it because they don't want to. Then everybody's using it, or something along those lines, or influence people better. But sometimes it needs to come top down to get that final push to really make it great for everyone.
And that sounds like a really good piece of advice, which leads me to a follow-up. If you had one advice to give to your younger self, doing his first steps in architecture or any type of leadership role, what would that advice be?
Well, if I think back on my very first leadership role professionally, I would say to myself, don't be so cocky. You don't know anything yet. But I thought I knew everything. And I thought it was all about running my team and making those people happy, and then they will do great things. Yes, that was very important. My team members were, if I talk to them still, they were very happy with me as their manager. What I totally ignored was influencing upwards, talking to my manager and my peers as other team leads and whatever. So that totally blew up. I totally failed there. It was learning it the hard way, and I should have had someone who put a hand on my shoulder and said, take it easy. You don't know anything yet, but I'll teach you. I should have been the one being, I would say, open to those kinds of conversations, which I wasn't at the time, I'm sure. I would have ignored all advices, but I also didn't have anyone who was, well, coaching me as a manager. There was an absent manager, and that was not very helpful being a learning manager.
I can relate so much to what you just said. I had a similar conversation, I think, in my first team lead job ever, where, I did had that person that put the hand in my shoulder and said, you are too cocky. This is not going to work out. You need to be able to lead people and convince people into going, even if you know it's the right way to do it. And you're right, it is the right way to do it, but you need to bring other people on for the journey. And you cannot do it if you're just cocky. People will throw in resistance just because. So
Exactly.
And talking a little bit about AI, because we talked about how having a good platform in the front end can really help you with this new vibe coding, because you would have your reusable components. You don't have the AI just completely, well, it can still completely hallucinate and put a component where it doesn't, but at least you greatly reduce the probability of it. I'm curious, how are you using AI in your current life to help you out with the new company, or just helping you out with anything?
Yeah, of course, I predate useful AI by quite a bit. So I'm a late adopter, I would say. I use it now for researching, for example, NoteLM, for doing research, for correcting my writing, to find better titles for whatever, that kind of basic stuff. I don't use it heavily. I still rely on my own brain for quite a bit. Having said that, there are obvious ways where it can greatly improve your productivity. And for myself, I'm still learning to use it in my daily work. I'm not a coder hands-on that much, so that's really not where I can speak from experience. But obviously, I speak to people a lot, and I hear a lot, and I read a lot, and I see a lot, and I just I can't shake the feeling that, well, just in general, think AI or not, it takes a great engineer to recognize great code, I believe. And it takes a great architect to understand that someone made a great design for something. If you are not senior enough in your role and you rely on Gen AI to do tasks for you, you must be able to judge the outcome of that. And if you would ask me, there should be a law against using Gen AI if you are junior in any role. If you don't know nothing yet, try and do yourself, make the mistakes yourself, fail yourself in every way possible and learn from that. But by handing off easy jobs, even if it's easy enough for, I don't know, for a meteor engineer, a junior cannot decide if that's good enough and why it works. So please don't overuse AI. And yes, if you're senior enough and you understand what you're doing and what the AI has produced, and you, God forbid, people are using agentic AI without a human factor, please don't. I can see code bases going from today, let's say, to completely unmanageable and having to start from scratch again in let's say 2 years, maybe 3 years if you're lucky. But then an organization is already there and you have a code base that is unmanageable. I just fear the worst if there's too much Gen AI in coding by people who don't understand what they're actually approving the AI to produce.
It seems like recently we kind of shifted the goalposts on a couple of those things. I remember back when I started this whole agile journey as a scrum master and all of that, that one of the things that you learned is that output does not equal outcome. And somehow nowadays we are using amount of lines of code produced as a measurement of how good the AI is or how good it is integrated with you. If we change that measurement and we put it on an engineer, that would make no sense. Like I saw the other day, oh, we have a great AI is producing on average on night between 3 million and 8 million lines of code.
Wow, I'm impressed, but I have no clue what that means.
Exactly. And what kind of code base needs that much code? And we are forgetting about the other part. And I think you touch upon a very, very important thing is if you are a junior, and there was a study that came out recently from MIT about how overusage of LLMs can hinder your learning capabilities. If you are a junior, yes, it's a good tool to have in your back pocket. Like if you are starting a project from scratch and you just want to bootstrap a lot of things, AI is great for that. Like it does a lot of stuff that you do as copy paste.
And just uses any starter templates and hopefully a book on explaining why it does what it does. Gets you started.
But if you end up in the situation where your code runs, you get a stack error that is very easy to fix, and the first thing that you do is ask the AI to fix that, you're going on the wrong direction. Like, don't lose that capability. I think, especially if you're a young person nowadays, you don't know this, but before the early 2000s, we all used to remember a lot of phone numbers. We don't know anymore.
True. I only know my wife's.
It's not like that knowledge occupied that much space in our brain. It's just that something came and took away the need to retain that knowledge. Being a software engineer, there is a lot of knowledge that you need to retain because maybe the AI will become super expensive in the future. We don't know. We are still in the beginnings of it. And you cannot overly rely on that.
Agreed. Yeah.
Cool. And if there is one lesson that you would like people to keep from this chat that we had, what would it be?
If talking about platform engineering, I would say if you take platform engineering seriously, take an interest in what your front-end developers do and how you can improve their life with your platform as well. Talking about leadership, influencing people is better than telling people, especially listening to them, trying to understand where they're coming from. And if they need nudges in the right direction, then keep it with nudges and try to let people develop themselves instead of being pushed in a certain direction.
Indeed, you get more flies with honey than with vinegar. I think there is a saying similar to this one. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for coming and having this chat with me. If people want to know more about you, if they want to reach out or hire you or know more about frontenders, what is the best way for them to know?
They should go to frontenders.io, frontenders with a Z instead of an S, or connect with me on LinkedIn.
Cool. We'll make sure to drop all of those links as well in the show notes. So if anyone is interested, you can just go to the show notes below and find the links to reach out to Jouke and know more about FrontendZ. Again, Jouke, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. And hope to see you again here.
Super. And to everyone still listening, take care of your front-end applications and see you soon away from the keyboards.